This is the story of George Weah, a man whose life has seen him move from a childhood in the slums of the capital of Liberia to Europe's most famous football clubs and now to being President of Liberia. Weah's soccer exploits and his charitable work off the field made him a hero to a country divided by tribe, politics and a brutal civil war. At some point, his charitable work even put him on a collision course with the Warlord and former Liberian President Charles Taylor, to such an extent that George Weah fled from Liberia fearing for his life. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the interesting life story of the man known as King George to his supporters. George Weah was born outside Monrovia, Liberia on the 1st of October 1966. His father was the first heavy-duty mechanic in Liberia, while his mother brought in money by selling goods from a table set up along Monrovia's waterfront. George Weah's parents separated when he was just a baby, and so the young boy became one of 13 children raised by his devoutly Christian grandmother, MacLeod Brown. The large family lived in a shack in the slums of Gibraltar neighborhood adjoining Claratown on Bush Road Island in Monrovia. The young man had a very strong bond with his grandmother and she was very supportive of him. He was even quoted saying in an interview that, "All the minutes and seconds and hours in my career, my entire life, I dedicate to my grandmother." According to accounts from family members that saw him grow up, they say that George started playing football the moment he learned to walk as a child. Like other boys in the neighborhood, young George sold popcorn, gambled and searched through garbage for bottles to sell just to make a bit of extra money. This was all while spending his youth playing barefoot soccer with homemade rag balls on the streets of Claratown, Monrovia.
Very difficult. I had a very difficult life, in terms of not having somebody to be there for me. But thank God I have my grandmother that took care of me. Yeah, things were difficult, and sometimes I don't like to go back to my youth days because it's not a pleasant life,
At this juncture, it is important to point out that when George Weah was growing up, the political landscape in Liberia was quite turbulent, to say the least. For instance, in April of 1980, when Weah was just 13 years old, he watched from the beach as a firing squad killed 13 officials of assassinated President William Tolbert's government. This was following a military coup led by Samuel Doe, the military man who took over from William Tolbert as president. When Samuel Doe took over, the nation of Liberia was full of hope and they truly believed that they had turned over a new leaf. In an interview that George Weah once gave, he said that the overthrow of William Tolbert empowered us in a positive way. After the coup, everything was open in Liberia. We could find jobs. Unfortunately, the relief was short-lived. Samuel Doe turned into a brutal dictator. Now back to George Weah. He attended high school on soccer scholarships, but he lacked interest in the academic side of it all, and so he dropped out of school after his junior year. Before his football career allowed him to move abroad, at some point young George worked for the Liberian Telecommunications Corporation as a switchboard technician. However, by 1981, George Weah was moving rapidly up through Liberia's best soccer teams, first playing for the Young Survivors, the Mighty Barrow, and then later for a team called the Invincible 11. Speaking of his experience in these teams, George Weah said they would play from morning till night every single day. Playing football was an outlet for them to escape from the squalid conditions and tough life of the slums. Weah's earnings from playing for the Invincible 11, who were the league champions, helped to support his grandmother and siblings. Before Samuel Doe came to power, football in Liberia was perceived as a sport for illiterates without education. Footballers were looked down upon. But President Samuel Doe wanted football to become a popular sport in his country. So under his leadership, Liberia entered a World Cup qualifying tournament for the first time. Samuel Doe later financed a 2-month training expedition in Brazil for the Liberian national team, and young George Weah was fortunate enough to be in this squad. President Samuel Doe later named George Weah as national team captain, and it is said Samuel Doe even distributed a briefcase of cash to the players when they won a match. But anyways, through all of this, George Weah was well on his way to becoming a global superstar. After conquering the Liberian local football scene, George Weah signed a 3-year semi-professional contract with top Cameroonian club Tonnerre of Yaoundé. This was in late December of 1987. Shortly thereafter, Weah's abilities were discovered by the Cameroon national team coach Claude Leroy, who relayed the news of the wonder kid to Arsene Wenger, who at the time was the coach of AS Monaco. Arsene Wenger flew to Cameroon to witness this player at work and was satisfied by what he saw. So George Weah put pen to paper and moved to Europe after he was signed by AS Monaco for a fee of about £12,000. In his early days in Europe, George Weah was out of his league. He really struggled to fit into the team. But this did not deter him. Ambition, talent and hard work turned him into a star team player and role model.
I remember it was, George, work hard, you're going to be a great player. And when I came to Europe, he was like a father to me. I want you to keep this. This is for me, but I want you to keep it because he deserves this more than I do. Thanks, Mr. Coach, for everything.
In his 5 seasons with AS Monaco, George Weah scored 57 goals and the team won the French Cup in 1991. His exceptional dribbling and shooting skills certainly made him a crowd favorite. He soon landed a very lucrative contract with the team PSG. In 1994, George Weah won the African Footballer of the Year award for the second time in his career, and in his most acclaimed season, George Weah led PSG to the French Cup, the league title, and to the semi-finals of the 1995 European Champions League. Subsequently, he was transferred to AC Milan in 1995 to play in Italy's Serie A, helping the club win the 1996 and 1999 league titles. Due to his performances with both PSG and AC Milan, in 1995, George Weah was the recipient of several individual awards. George Weah won the Ballon d'Or and was named FIFA World Player of the Year, becoming the first and currently only African player to win these prestigious awards.
Yeah, 95, 95 d'oro, George Weah. George Weah che ritorna per la seconda volta.
In January of the year 2000, AC Milan loaned George Weah to Chelsea Football Club, where he made an important contribution to that team's FA Cup triumph. Despite his fame around the world and his vast riches, George Weah always had his heart in Liberia. During this time, the situation in Liberia had gone from bad to worse. The country had been devastated by poverty and civil war in the 1990s, and George Weah felt that he had to do something about this sad and bleak state of affairs in his home country. Liberia was burning and warlords were carving up the country for themselves. In 1990, rebels led by Prince Yomi Johnson captured President Samuel Doe and videotaped themselves dismembering him alive. After Samuel Doe's death, the country descended into further anarchy. As all of this was happening, in 1994, George Weah recruited children from throughout the country for the Junior Professionals, a soccer team whose only requirement was that the players remain in school. That same year, George Weah helped UNICEF to publicize its Liberian immunization campaign. Beginning in 1997, as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, George Weah helped raise awareness of HIV and AIDS and promoted other UNICEF projects in Liberia and Ghana. But just before that, in 1996, months after being named FIFA World Player, George Weah now felt that he had a huge platform to raise awareness about Liberia's situation. So he began talking to sports writers from around the world about his homeland's misery, and he gave an interview to an American newspaper saying that it was time for the United Nations to intervene in Liberia. After that story was published, militiamen that were loyal to Charles Taylor, then a rebel leader, ransacked and torched George Weah's beachfront mansion in Monrovia. They also raped 2 of his cousins. Afterwards, one of Charles Taylor's associates was even spotted driving George Weah's top-of-the-range Mercedes around Monrovia. They wanted to send a message to King George, and the message was for him to stick to soccer and nothing more. At the time when the attack happened, George Weah was in Italy and his family was in New York. Although he rebuilt the house that was ransacked, Weah found it impossible to live with its memories, and so he turned it into a place called the King's Lodge to house the players of the Liberian national team. Despite these horrors, George Weah continued to return to Liberia, handing out money to people in the streets and hospitals. He pointed out that Liberian taxpayers had paid for him to develop his soccer skills, and that's why he felt this burden to give back to his dear country. After Charles Taylor was elected president, George Weah grudgingly made amends with him. George Weah also continued to be involved in humanitarian work. In addition to supporting educational and vocational programs in Liberia, he was involved in the process of disarming the warring factions and rehabilitating child soldiers. He also built a children's hospital in Monrovia. By the year 2000, George Weah was playing for his third professional team in 10 months, and he had been switched from being a striker to now being a midfielder, and so he had begun to consider retiring from football. Meanwhile, all this time he had spent nearly $2 million of his money keeping the Liberian national team going during the Civil War. He had moved their training camp to the Ivory Coast, paid the players' salaries, and bought their equipment and jerseys. In June of 2000, George Weah took over as the coach, technical director, and star player of the Liberian national team. The year 2001 saw King George lead his tiny nation on a somewhat spectacular run through the World Cup qualification rounds. Fans in Liberia were over the moon, and some started saying that he could be president. As you can imagine, this did not go down well with the incumbent, Charles Taylor, even though George Weah denied interest in running for this top office. When the team's World Cup bid fell short, George Weah fled Liberia, fearing imprisonment or worse at the hands of Charles Taylor. On June 11, 2005, at the age of 38, George Weah said goodbye to football after an all-star farewell match held in his honor in Marseille, France. Now, almost everyone in Liberia knew about George Weah because of his exploits on the football pitch and his philanthropic work across the country. Though George Weah had made a positive impact in his country, he felt that the best way to effect real change in Liberia was to run for the highest office in the land. That is why he made the decision to join politics. After retiring from professional football, George Weah returned to Liberia and became involved in politics. In 2005, at the age of 39, he ran for president of Liberia. George Weah's humble beginnings, immense popularity, and lack of ties to former corrupt political regimes made him a staunch favorite when he launched his 2005 presidential campaign. As I mentioned earlier, during that time, Liberia was in a dire state. Hundreds of thousands of people were still refugees, and the unemployment rate was 85%. In the presidential campaign, George Weah positioned himself as a man of the people who knew the day-to-day struggles that the common man experienced. At one campaign rally, he even told his followers that, "I don't need political experience to give you light and water or to see that the roads are bad. I know where you come from." Well, his challenge as a political outsider ruffled a few feathers amongst the Liberian political elite. While some politicians embraced George Weah as they hoped to ride his popularity wave to power, others attacked him and questioned his lack of governing experience and his almost non-existent education. Remember, George Weah was a high school dropout. This was in contrast with his Harvard-educated opponent, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Others launched a scathing attack as they wanted him to be thrown off the ballot on the grounds that he once carried a French passport. They also questioned other aspects of his lifestyle. His opponents wanted to paint the picture of an immature and flamboyant playboy who was also susceptible to manipulation. Anyways, in October of 2005, Liberia took to the polls and the results showed that George Weah garnered 28% of the vote, although he claimed to have won 62%. A runoff election followed in November between George Weah and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who had won 20% in the first round. This runoff election took place under the scrutiny of 15,000 United Nations peacekeepers. In the runoff, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf won 59% of the popular vote. After these results were published, George Weah claimed that there was election fraud, and although he called for peace, His supporters clashed with the United Nations peacekeepers and Liberian police in Monrovia. The announcement of a new leader for Liberia was postponed until further election investigations were carried out. International observers called the election free and fair, and George Weah dropped his complaint after several other African leaders intervened. On the 23rd of November 2005, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was declared the winner of the Liberian election and was confirmed as the country's next president and the first woman to be elected as president of an African country. Despite the defeat, George Weah continued to promote humanitarian projects in Liberia. He also continued his involvement with the national soccer team. Although their effort was eventually unsuccessful, he helped fund the Liberian national soccer team in their attempt to reach their first World Cup in South Africa in 2010. His defeat in the 2005 elections would not be the end of George Weah in the political world. His crowning glory was just on the horizon. Success in politics for George Weah finally came in the year 2014 when he was elected as senator for the western province of Montserrado, which includes the capital, Monrovia. In April of 2016, George Weah made the announcement that he would make a second bid for the presidency. This was met with a resounding positive response from his supporters. George Weah finally ran for president in 2017, defeating Joseph Boakai. George Weah won 62% of the vote, compared to Boakai's 38%. Much of George Weah's support came from the Liberian youth, and his bid for the presidency was also bolstered by the fact that President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf did not endorse Boakai, who was their vice president. In his inaugural address on the 22nd of January 2018, George Weah promised to fight corruption, pay civil servants, and show the private sector that Liberia was open for business. If you are from Liberia, please let me know how George Weah has fared so far as president. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.